Very recently, I did a video about NetherRealm Studios possibly working with Marvel for their next game. This has been a rumor that's been floating around for some time. If you want to check out my video talking about that, I'll leave a link to it in the description. But one of the things we talked about in that video was the potential of the dream fighting game I think a lot of us would want to see, which is Marvel versus DC. Now, that doesn't mean it's time to get your hopes up about a potential Marvel versus DC game, though I certainly think it's possible, and I list exactly why I think it's possible in that video. That was all I was going to say on the subject. But since I've done that video, a bunch of people have asked me to do a roster prediction or wish list for this potential game. But I don't think it's time to talk about wish lists or prediction lists. When we don't even know that a game's coming or not, it's really hard to talk about what that roster might look like. So instead of doing a wish list or a prediction list, I'm going to do something in between. I'm going to be theory crafting a roster that I think would work well as far as servicing both DC fans and Marvel fans. Now, obviously, I think there needs to be a split right down the middle. I think there needs to be a fair number of characters for both sides of the roster, or else, of course, the fans are going to be upset on either side. And I also think it's important to get a mixture of both niche characters and popular characters. Again, just to be clear, in case you've navigated to this video and you have no idea what we're talking about, this is just a rumored game, something that people have speculated about for a while, something that we would all love to see. This is not an announced game. Do not expect to see Marvel versus DC. I just want to doubly clear that up because I don't want to get anyone's hopes up prematurely. The information we have about NetherRealm's next game is simply that it's currently being worked on, and we also know that they had a conversation with Marvel some time ago. Who knows whether that conversation went well or not? Again, not the purpose of this video. So for the purposes of this video, I think I'm going to do one Marvel character, one DC character, and then so on until we get to the end of this roster. And again, for roster size, I thought it was important to split it right down the middle. So I think you either need a roster of 30 or 40 or somewhere in that range. I decided to go with 40 for this video because I'd rather not limit myself, and this is a very for fun video. It's not a prediction list. If it was a prediction list, I would try to narrow down exactly what size of roster I was expecting. But again, this is very, very much a conceptual for fun video. For the Marvel side of things, my number one most requested character, the character I would absolutely beg for, thankfully I would imagine he's pretty likely, and that's Spider-Man. Spider-Man's by far my favorite Marvel character. Anybody who's been following me for a while, you know that I definitely lean more towards DC. I just prefer the DC character designs. Nothing against Marvel, just I have a slight preference to DC. However, that's not the case for Spider-Man. Spider-Man beats out a lot of my favorite DC characters. I love the character. He's what drew me back into the MCU after I stopped watching it for a considerable amount of time. Spider-Man is my jam, and I would love to see him in a NetherRealm game. For DC, I think you have to go with Superman. Of course, Superman's got to be in this type of game. On the Marvel side, I think Black Panther would be good representation. Throw Black Panther in there. He also fills in a different character archetype that we wouldn't have in the game otherwise. Very, very cool Rushdown-esque character. On the DC side, of course, we've got to fill out Batman. Batman has to be in the game. Marvel side, Iron Man, of course, another given. The DC side, The Flash. I think there's actually a couple different ways you could go with The Flash in this type of game. I don't even think it needs to be Barry Allen. I think you could do Wally West. Heck, you might even just do Reverse Flash, Eobard Thawne, as the only speedster representation, at least on the DC side. But regardless, a Flash needs to be in the game for sure. On the Marvel side, again, another given, you have to have Captain America. I don't actually think you have to go with Steve Rogers here, but regardless, a Captain America needs to be on the roster. On the DC side of things, we're going to go with Wonder Woman. Of course, another given, has to be in the game. Hulk is a big guy, and he needs to be on the roster. He's a very popular character, a big part of the MCU. Feels like another requirement. Green Lantern on the DC side. There's so much Green Lantern stuff coming out in the future. There's the TV series, and I believe the movie is also still coming, so Green Lantern will be pushed by DC for quite a while now, so I'm going to guess that Green Lantern does get a character slot in any future DC game. On the Marvel side of things, we're going to go with Hawkeye, our first Archer of the game. Hawkeye is one of those characters who doesn't feel like a requirement, but I don't think that NetherRealm would give up the opportunity to have Hawkeye and Green Arrow interact with each other. Spoilers, Green Arrow is later in my DC list. We'll get to that when we get to that. Cyborg's the first character I have on the DC side that might not necessarily be a requirement, but I'd like Cyborg, and I'd like to see what they do with a new Cyborg moveset. NetherRealm so far with the Injustice games have kept the moveset from the previous game and then just kind of adjusted it a little bit. I would hope that if they do a Marvel versus DC game, it would be brand new universal systems, meaning that everybody would need a new moveset, and I'd be excited to see what they pull off with Cyborg. Thor on the Marvel side, I would love to see that. I thematically like Thor quite a bit. I didn't really like him in the Marvel vs. Capcom games, so I don't know what I would expect NetherRealm to do differently, but hopefully time will tell. Aquaman on the DC side, I think Aquaman might be in a little bit of danger if they did a Marvel vs. DC game. He's still a popular character, and I think he's worth putting in the game, if not just because he brings a bit of identity to the DC roster that the Marvel side of the roster isn't going to have. Now, Marvel obviously has a Aquaman equivalent character, but that character is not at the forefront of Marvel in the same way that Aquaman is at the forefront of DC. On the Marvel side, Black Widow, I feel like all of the main MCU characters would have to be in the Marvel side of the roster. There are so many fans of Marvel that initially started with the MCU and now they're Marvel fans. They read the comics and they do all of that. So bringing in the characters that they know and love from the MCU is of course very important for that kind of cross-branding thing that they have going on right now, and Black Widow fits into that perfectly. On the DC side is my first character that was not in the most recent Injustice game, and that is Shazam. It kind of felt like a shame not having Shazam in Injustice 2, especially because his villain Black Adam was in the game, but he was not. And I would hope that if they do DC versus Marvel, Shazam would get his spot. Captain Marvel's up next, of course, a forefront of the MCU, and a pretty cool character to boot. I would love to see what NetherRealm does with that type of character. Green Arrow is our next DC character. We talked about him a little bit before. One of the things that NetherRealm excels at is their ability to tell stories in a fighting game, something that most fighting game developers don't do particularly well. I feel like NetherRealm would have a lot of fun pairing Hawkeye with Green Arrow, and the two of them would just kind of make fun of each other. As far as gameplay goes, there's lots of ways to separate them, right? You could have one of them be a pure zoning character and the other one be kind of martial arts based and just happens to have a projectile. Maybe that one that is martial arts based and then also has the projectile has like a freeze arrow or something like that so they can continue combos much longer than the zoning alternative. Another thing to keep in mind for the Green Arrow slot is that they might not even go for Oliver Queen. For those following the CW universe, Mia Queen is getting her own television series, and that might be enough to push her in over the original Green Arrow Oliver Queen. I'm not saying that will happen, but it is something to keep in mind. On the Marvel side, I have Deadpool. The picture I'm using has a bow and arrow, but I doubt that he would. I haven't been keeping track of my MCU news recently, so I don't know what the status of Deadpool is, but last I heard, Marvel has access to all of their characters now, including X-Men and Deadpool. I could be wrong about that. Again, this is why we're not doing like an actual prediction list. If this game ever does get announced in the future, I'll do an updated version of this that is actually closer to a prediction list where we're trying to narrow down each of the characters that will be on the roster. Batwoman is up next for the DC side. Unfortunate news that Ruby Rose will be stepping down as Batwoman for season 2 of Batwoman. She got injured a couple times on set, and I believe that she's been advised to no longer work on the series, so that is unfortunate to hear. I'm sure whoever replaces her will do a fantastic job, but regardless, I like the Batwoman character quite a bit. Batwoman was actually one of the characters I was requesting the most back when Injustice 2 was happening, when we were talking about the potential DLC characters for that game. I was throwing around the name Batwoman quite a lot because I like the character. On the Marvel side, we're going to have our first X-Men character, and that is Wolverine. Well, unless you count Deadpool, but Wolverine. Wolverine is such a cool character. For me, it's been one of the greatest shames of the MCU. It's been kind of sad that we haven't had access to X-Men. I'm really excited to see what they do with X-Men in the MCU. And of course, Wolverine has a huge history in fighting games because of Marvel vs. Capcom. So seeing NetherRealm do their own version of Wolverine would be pretty cool to see. On the DC side, we're going to have Beast Boy, a character that's been highly requested for the Injustice series for a very long time. What better time to bring him in than a Marvel vs. DC game? In reality, he would probably end up being DLC because he's a really easy character to sell to people. The same thing that they did for Red Hood in Injustice 2. But hopefully, regardless of how it ends up happening, that Beast Boy would get his shot in whatever the next DC fighting game is. Scarlet Witch is my next Marvel representation. We needed a magic user on that side of the roster, and who better than Scarlet Witch? We do have another magic user coming up pretty soon, so don't you worry about that. On the DC side of things, we got Vibe. I think Vibe was snubbed from Injustice 2. Vibe is such a cool character. It's such a big shame to not see him in any of the Injustice games. I would hope that if we do get another Injustice game in the future, or again, any DC game, I would hope that Vibe finally gets his shot. He has such high potential for a really amazing moveset, throwing you in between different dimensions as he keeps beating you up, hitting you with his Vibe Blast. The character just has so much potential. Anyway, moving on to the Marvel side, I'm going to go with Star-Lord. We needed a Guardian in there. Kind of sad that we won't be able to get too many Guardians, and the same thing goes for one of the other characters we're going to talk about in just a minute, but it's going to be hard to get a lot of these groups into this game just because of how many characters we're going to have access to. I mean, really, if we're looking at the roster roster right now, I think I'm being generous by putting 20 characters on each side, and even still, I'm not able to fit in all the characters that I want, especially when it comes to these groups like the Guardians of the Galaxy or another group that we'll talk about in just a moment. Perhaps some of these characters that have an identity to a group will be able to use some type of ultimate attack that has their group involved with it. So for example, with Star-Lord, maybe when he does his super attack, a bunch of the other Guardians like Groot and all of these other guys run in and help him during his super, but I think that's the closest we're going to get to anything like that. On the DC side of things, we have our first Justice Society member, Stargirl. She has her very own series coming out soon, so it wouldn't surprise me at all to start seeing her in more stuff, whether it be video games, a new comic book run, whatever it be. Ant-Man and the Wasp are my next Marvel characters, and I want them to both be one character. Now, if you're a fighting game player, you might be thinking, oh, how are they going to do a small character like Ant-Man? This is a conversation that I hate because we've had it so many times. In Injustice 1, I talked about how I wanted to see Adam as a playable character. In Injustice 2, I talked about how I wanted to see Adam as a playable character. And every time we bring up one of these characters, someone comes along and says, how are you going to do a character that is just so small? And the answer is, you don't make them small all the time. Only during two-player animations and animations where they're not going to get hit anyway. Thankfully, we have an example of how this would work because Adam did manage to make it into Injustice 2. Now, it starts getting a little more complicated when you have two different characters. You've got Ant-Man and the Wasp as one character. I think the best way to do this would be also pretty simple. You would do it during two-player animations. Ant-Man would probably be the main character, and perhaps the Wasp could come out for specific special moves. Yeah, I don't think that this would be a difficult character to make. It would certainly be a unique character for the roster, but I'm sure NetherRealm is up to the challenge. If we ever get another DC game from NetherRealm, which I'm sure is going to happen at some point, whether it be Marvel vs. DC or Injustice, whatever. If we don't get Constantine, I am going to be so sad. I love Constantine as a character far more than I did a couple years ago. The character is great. Another one of those characters with an incredibly high potential for a awesome moveset. Doctor Strange is another magic user I'm going to have on the Marvel side of the roster. Very, very popular character, very cool character, and he has an aesthetic that isn't matched by anybody on either side of these rosters. Hawkman is up next on my DC side of things, and I didn't know whether I wanted Hawkman on the roster or not. We had Hawkgirl in Injustice 1. To be honest, I didn't really like her moveset, but I was looking for a big brooding guy, someone who can hit hard. And I've got some other people left on the list who do hit hard, but I wanted someone who wasn't a grappler, but someone who could use really long range attacks and hit hard and just kind of zone out the opponent without projectiles. Somebody who plays with their reach in mind. Something like Scarecrow from Injustice 2, and I think Hawkman actually fits that bill. Now, he might actually have a projectile because of the way that his mace works, but I think he would just have really long range hits that deal lots of damage, and I think that type of moveset is needed on the rest of my roster. You'll see here that we don't really have that at all. I mean, we have grapplers with characters like the Hulk and some other people you can't see right now, but we didn't have like a big hard-hitting guy who focused on reach, and I thought Hawkman would be the perfect one. This is another one of those characters who suffers from not having his group alongside him, and that is Mr. Fantastic. Again, I think the best way to incorporate the Fantastic Four would be through his super or something like that, but I think if you're going to have just one of the Fantastic Four members playable, it would be Mr. Fantastic. Harley Quinn, one of my favorite DC characters, of course. On the Marvel side, we have Venom. I love this character, man. There's a lot of ways you could take a Venom moveset. He could be a grappler, he could be kind of like a Swamp Thing character, kind of what we were talking about before. Someone who has lots of reach and is able to hit hard as a result. He could also be a rushdown character. There's so many different ways that you could design Venom's moveset. Regardless of whatever you come up with, I'm probably going to enjoy it just because of how much I aesthetically vibe with Venom. On the DC side, we've got our Deathstroke. You cannot pass up the possibility of having Deathstroke and Deadpool in the same game. You just can't do it. For Marvel, one of my favorite villains from Marvel, Loki. I don't have to talk about this one, right? Loki would have the stupidest moveset, but the best moveset. I want him to have clones. I want you to not be able to tell which one is which. I want you to be able to teleport. I want you to be able to do stupid things with Loki, and he's going to be really annoying to verse, but he's going to be really fun as a result. On the DC side, I had to get a Cryomancer in the game, and I decided to go with Killer Frost over anybody like Captain Cold or Mr. Freeze. I just prefer Killer Frost as the Cryomancer pick, just my personal preference. Dr. Doom for my Marvel side. I wanted to get more Fantastic Four representation in there, and I felt like it was the only way I could do it without being unfair to the rest of the Fantastic Four members. I also think he works as a pretty solid villain for the game. Maybe some of the villains team up. I don't know what the story would look like. Who knows? For DC, we need the Clown Prince of Crime, Joker. Joker's just one of the most popular comic book characters of all time. Marvel's last character, I've gone with Thanos. We need a big bad, and he's as big as they get, so Thanos. And a similar thought process goes for my last DC character, Lex Luthor. We need someone maniacal, we need someone smart, and we need someone who could potentially lead an operation between all of these villains. He also works as a pretty solid grappler with weird zoning stuff. Honestly, I think this is a pretty well-rounded roster. You've got lots of different movesets, lots of different aesthetics, lots of different character types for potential story mode stuff. You've got a lot of cool interactions that could happen here. Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel interacting with each other would be cool. Batman and Black Panther interacting with each other. Batman and Captain America. Iron Man and Batman. Heck, I think Spider-Man and Shazam meeting each other would be pretty cool. I would love to see basically any of the Marvel characters reacting to Joker as a character. And the same thing goes for the DC side, but reacting to Deadpool. Obviously, this game would be a dream come true. I hope you feel the same way. Let me know what characters I missed. Let me know what characters you would like to see on this roster. But don't just say all the characters you want, okay? If you want to get a character on this roster, you have to deduct somebody, okay? So if you want to come into the comment section, you want to say, I want Human Torch in the game. I'm a huge Human Torch fan. Well, then you have to delete someone from this roster, okay? You can't just slide one in. I want to hear it, okay? What would you change about my dream Marvel versus DC roster? Thank you so much for watching this video. My name has been Bilbsy. I got more stuff in the oven right now, as Ed Boon would say. So I hope you're subscribed for that. I'll be sure to catch you in the next video.